Noswaith dda a croeso. Good evening, everyone, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this lecture. It really is a pleasure. This is our distinguished alumni lecture series, and our speaker this evening is Caradoc Jones, who, as well as being a Bangor University alumni, is one of the university's honorary degree recipients, having received a D.Litt for outstanding sporting achievements in 2023. Caradoc Jones is a distinguished climber, known for his first ascents and a string of mountaineering achievements. He's also an expedition leader, television presenter, and fisheries consultant. He's perhaps best known for being the first Welshman to climb to the summit of Mount Everest, continuing the university's close association with the tallest mountain in the world, with one of our previous Vice-Chancellors, the third Vice-Chancellor, Sir Charles Evans, coming close to reaching the summit of the mountain just 2 days before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay's achievement in May 1953. Caradoc graduated from Bangor in 1982 with a BSc in Marine Biology and Oceanography. During his undergraduate years, he was president of the university's Mountaineering Club. He was the first South Georgia Harbour Master after the Falklands War, and now, as a fisheries consultant, he spends 8 months a year in the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, and much of the remainder of the year climbing or leading expeditions across the world. His achievements are truly remarkable. He's climbed all over the world, and he's made several first and solo ascents. In the Karakoram range of Pakistan, in Africa, including new routes on Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, across South Georgia in the South Atlantic, and has many first ascents to his name on rock and ice throughout the UK. He's also presented and been part of a host of climbing, nature and travel programmes, including On Top of the World, a film about the first Welsh ascent of Everest, and the award-winning A Winter Traverse of the Ansgar Gorge in the Himalayas. It's a really great pleasure to welcome Caradoc back to Bangor to give this lecture. I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Vice-Chancellor. Great, well, just play the first track if the technology doesn't defeat us. I think it probably has. I'll just play that again. Well, don't worry, you can read the lyrics. Great Wirral band. I'd definitely recommend buying that album. There's a bit of a strange title. A friend of mine said, well, what on earth are you actually talking about? The title for your lecture, I haven't got a clue what it is. So I told him it was an important Welsh Government education initiative to get a one-way system down College Road so that art students didn't have an excuse not to go to lectures anymore. But the titles apart, it's mainly going to be my holiday snaps with a few thoughts on work chucked in with life in the universe, plus, of course, my apoplectic zeal to get fisheries scientists and managers to use generic data models and tools to have shareable solutions for simple but effective environmental management. We have so many rickety carts with wheels of different sizes going off in all directions. And in any case, we have got the great white elephant of climate change charging towards us. The change in ecosystems and economies is already disrupting society on local and global scales. very few have the resources or the political will and wherewithal to implement complex technical solutions. We must focus on implementing those simple management strategies that have a chance of being effective. What we need is one of these, really. We have to reinvent our way of life, or we'll go the way of the dinosaurs. And talking of which, next week's talk for the science fair is by the man who made monsters, Tim Haynes, of Walking with Dinosaurs fame. And strangely enough, Tim and I shared a house for 2 years during when we started at Bangor. And I remember even then his two great passions were drama and zoology. And if ever there was a great illustration of how you can combine apparently disparate interests to amazing effect, that would be what Tim has done in his working life. So it's going to be very interesting to hear what he has to say. And that might be an extreme example of what multidisciplinary approach, but it is incredible what combining different perspectives can achieve. For me, on a more personal level, a place like Bangor allowed me to study marine science without having to give up climbing. To the contrary, the characters I met here and the setting itself allowed me to pursue those two great interests, something I continue to do. Climbing does give you an alternative perspective on life, somehow allows you to step outside the game and perhaps see patterns that may not always be so apparent when you're fully immersed or even drowning in the minutiae of life. No less person than Bill Bryson once said that the one time he tried a conventional existence, somebody commented, Bill's not really with the programme. And I think any programme really would be all the better for having Bill Bryson in it. And for the environmental crisis, we have to reach a political consensus right across the board. Those programmes do have rules, many of which have to serve a purpose. I think the trick, though, is to discern the essence of the task in hand and not to get distracted to purely satisfy those administrative frameworks. That may sound a bit of a cliche, but it is becoming an increasing problem. Sure, I advocate for efficient use of generic IT systems. However, just when they're trying to make machines think more like people, we will not get imaginative solutions by making people think more like machines. The problem is, all too often, we're basing those technical solutions around the technological tools themselves and the administrative frameworks, rather than the underlying physical reality. And this octopus gives me a fond recollection of the number of reports I used to have to write every week in my most recent role. And really, for the data scientists amongst you, I won't dwell on this for too long, I promise, but all data models should be based on the unchanging physical realities and not the research, management, or admin processes used in any regime. All those things can be based on queries that access that underlying data model. Then and only then does the data model and the analysis tool become reusable and extensible. The classic trap being, in a spreadsheet when suddenly you've got an extra species, but in your spreadsheet you have to add in 2 extra columns for that species. Well, suddenly your previous program that you had that analysed that spreadsheet doesn't work because there's 2 new columns. But if you structure the additional complexity into the model itself, nothing changes. Your added complexity just becomes more data. And your old analysis tools continue to work even though you've got a new situation to represent. So here's an example of an increasingly complex fishery. In the first box at the top, you've only got one region, one type of fishing, one type of habitat, and the catch that's taken. The second box, you've actually got 2 types of habitat, but the model holding the data is identical. Anything that analyses that will still work, even though you've got added complexity. There's no change in the structure. The complexity is in the data content, not the data structure. In the third one, we've actually got two different types of fishing method. The fishing economic unit could be a trawler, could be a tidal trap, could be a pond you pump out to get the fish. And in the final one, you've got two regions in that fishery that you want to manage separately. Again, any program will work on that structure without any changes. And finally, once you've got that framework set up, you can then put your sampling regime within it, and any frame surveys to raise the overall results will work within that framework without having to change anything. And really, that's the way data models should be used in fisheries, but I've been banging my head against a brick wall on this for years and written many reports which are still gathering dust on shelves. And it seems that we're actually going backwards. It's like being in the Tower of Babel with proliferating systems and software and different models. The ability to share information and share tools is getting further and further away, not closer, especially once you have various IT ecosystems popping up, whether it be Microsoft, Google, Apple, etc. There's all this bifurcation all the time. I think it's a real issue. Places that were using relational databases 20 years ago have reverted to spreadsheets. It's going backwards, not forwards. But I've just come back from the Blue Belt Symposium, and this is at least the start to try and get those things joined up. And I spent the previous 2 years out in Biot as the Senior Fisheries Protection Officer out there. And this is the government's major effort to bring together all of the overseas territories to share experiences to better plan for the future. This is definitely a programme where the adoption of genetic tools should help all the member territories. As an example of how to maximise the benefit of satellite surveillance against illegal fishing in marine protected areas, how do you identify the bad actors? We used to get daily reports like this, one set of dots every day, but it's almost impossible to discern any patterns and to form any kind of patrolling strategy based on these daily snapshots. So I basically took the data, underlying data, and remapped it by linking together the identifiers for all the vessels and their fishing gear, because even though they switch off their transponders, they also use transponders on their gear, which you can link back to the vessel. And that way, we get to identify the vessels that are behaving in a typical fishing pattern, i.e. we can identify the bad actors. All of the ones that are doing legal straight-through transits on a free right of passage, we can just make all those invisible. There's also hundreds of freighters and other merchant traffic passing through every day. And so we're left with just the vessels that are engaged probably in fishing activity. And we spent a long time homing in on this guy whose pattern continued in a very suspicious manner. We never actually caught them. So we guessed they'd left the zone. So we went into Maldivian waters across and then re-entered down here to try and catch them. But then came across this white track, which in the intervening days had extended the suspicious pattern further. And we got alongside at dawn, and sure enough, they were pulling up gear, and they had a 40-mile long line extending down here, as did several of these other vessels. But we focused on this one to collect the hard evidence of them actually hauling gear and live tuna, in this case, coming aboard. And for those vessels that have switched off their transponders, we have satellite surveillance with individual vessels picked up here. And with this kind of stuff, you can then plan a patrol through the inner banks, through the various coral lagoons, to make most effective use of your patrol vessel. So that's a good example of how you can combine data to good practical effect. And the other stuff a fisheries officer does is island inspections. This would be the patrol vessel track coming in here and the rib launched to come in. And then we typically, this is one of the few islands where you can actually get ashore with the rib. Usually you can only get to the coral fringes, and then you just put your dry bag on your back, mask, snorkel and fins, and swim in over the reef, stash your gear on the island, walk around, inspect it, to check there's no illicit fishing camps been established, check for turtles and wildlife, and in this case checking on a wreck from the previous season. So by the time I got around there, it had been completely destroyed on the fringing reef. Other jobs, vessels sometimes run aground, can help to attempt to refloat them so they're not cluttering up the islands. Importantly, if they want to try and lower their ballast, they'll just pump out fuel straight onto a reef. So you need to get alongside them and get them to pump all the fuel into containers and transship it, and all their fishing gear, because you don't want to have hundreds of miles of long line getting strewn over the coral reefs. And then you've got the crew to deal with to get them back to their home country. So it's fairly busy. And I like to think of myself like this, really. You know, and it is important to avoid the Messiah complex when you're a fisheries officer. So that's me, firm but fair, as I was known in the trade. And so I don't know if there's any theologians among us, but I'm very curious as to what this guy over here is doing at the back with the staff. It looks very suspicious. We also support a wide range of scientific projects. The Zoological Society of London, in this case, plastics pollution study. If you think of that lot there, multiply it times 40, that 40 giant sacks this high of plastic bottles off 723 metres of beach that was cleaned completely 2 years previously. We had 40 sacks come in that 2 years, and if you extrapolate that up for all of the Chagos shorelines, it back of a fag packet calculation kind of equates to 200 tonnes per annum coming in just in plastic bottles, flip-flops and discarded fishing gear. Of course, it was absolute hell, but there was the odd bit of downtime. This is my colleague Rhys Diplock, and I tried to reproduce this photograph, but for somehow I just never got to look as good as Pretty Boy. The amount of money I could have made renting him out would have put the fishing licenses into perspective. Sadly, he's lost now. He's gone to become a professional diver, so he's no longer with the programme, as Bill would have said. And when I showed the picture of me sitting on this tree to my wife, she said, "Why are you sitting down? Why weren't you working?" You know. So I think that's what my boss said as well at the time. But talking of true paradise, you can't beat a Welsh hill farm, and this is the area where I grew up in. I wasn't born in this farm, but it's farmed by a guy I went to school with, Glyndwr, and I think it's rated as one of the most remote farms in Wales. Some of those central Wales Cambrian mountain hills make the Carneddau look like a theme park. They're so vast till you get to the next inhabited place. And this is what I grew up with, and often wandered about far and wide across these. Well, I was quite young, really, ever curious about what was over the next horizon. And it was a great place to to gain that sort of confidence, no fear about being out on your own in the sort of desolate landscape, really. That just always sort of came naturally. I was lucky to have an early mentor, a guy called Derek Ellis, who worked with my dad. He taught me all the basics, and after that I just bought books and I made it up as I went along. Derek moved away after a couple of years of introducing me to climbing, but luckily my sister was in the climbing club at Cardiff University, so I just used to traipse around the country. Wherever the Cardiff club was going to, I would pitch up. At 13 and 14, I was hitching all over the country, up to Snowdonia, Peak District, even up to Scotland. I remember the trip to Glencoe during Easter '75 for the first winter climbing outside of Wales, and I should have been revising for my O-levels, but we were doing Macbeth as part of English literature. We crossed Rannoch Moor, and I thought, this is it. This is the blasted heath where sort of, the witches are brewing up toil and trouble. And whenever I'm climbing on the Buchail, Etive Moor, and here's me on Raven's Gully, I always think of Macbeth when I look out across Rannoch Moor. It's a great place. And so gradually built experience, rock climbs, then winter climbing in Britain. Then the next stage was the Alps. And so after the first year 6, that summer after the O-levels, I'd worked in Llanberis, and I'd become mates with Martin Crook, who said, we've got to get out to the Alps, youth. That's where it's at. So I managed to buy an old Ford Anglia van for £70 off some total of my inheritance, and I passed my test on the Wednesday, and we drove to Chamonix on Saturday, and we managed to get up Mont Blanc together. And then at that time, soloing was all the rage, really. So we all went off to solo different routes, and I remember doing the northwest face of the Midi, and got to the middle section. It's quite tricky, and I thought, I'll put a bit of a back rope on a few steep ice pitches here, and put an ice screw in, and then just pull the rope through, because it looks, like it's going to be difficult above. And then when I pulled the rope through and threw the end down, I had an ancient harness with a sticky carabiner, and the gate on the crab stayed open, and the rope just disappeared, and I just throw my rope away completely. Couldn't ab off, couldn't use it to back rope any pitches, and so it was just a case of really having to solo it all the way. And there's several quite hard bits, and I remember being very grateful when I finally got to the top of the Aiguille du Midi that day. And then the best day was I was staying in the old wrecked Cosmiques hut on the at the base of the Cosmiques arête, getting up at dawn, up Mont Blanc de Tacol, back to the hut, soloing the Cosmiques arête to the summit of the Midi, and then doing the Midi plan traverse both ways, all within the day. That was the best day out in the Alps. And then it was... my sister was married to Steve Ashton, and I used to climb a lot with Steve and really look up to him. He had a tremendous sense of humour, and he was a great writer as well, so I really admired him. And then he was doing oceanography and maths at Bangor, and I think I was due to go to Loughborough then to do ergonomics, and then I was just dreading going to live on the English plains, thinking, how am I going to keep climbing? I started looking through his oceanography books, and I'd done geography and biology, and I kind of thought, oh God, oceanography looks interesting. I could combine it with marine biology, and I could still, be in Snowdonia. So it seemed like a no-brainer, really. And Dooley came to Bangor. Sinclair Buchan interviewed me, and I think there might be a few of you who remember what a great guy he was. And if you have Sinclair interviewing you, it was a done deal, really. He was such a nice chap. but for some reason I never could master his subject, which was sediment mechanics. It was an absolute killer, and I always regret that. But so that's what brought me to Bangor, and really just 4 fantastic years. In those days, I didn't have enough maths and chemistry, but you could kind of do an induction year to get you up to speed on those before commencing your degree course proper. And all spare time was spent on various routes. This in loaning the tube here in the Llanberis quarries, and on Red Wall there on the South Stack on Anglesey. And that's a genuine shot there on the cantilever on Glyder Fach. Now, I was going to show you lots of pictures of people from the club in those days, but some of them were here tonight. They're just, I'll just get back to that one. And they threatened me with various legal actions, because they're major international industrialists and heads of national representative bodies, and they said they would unearth certain pictures, etc., if I dared to expose them. So I've got some pictures here of Manchester University mountaineering club, and really it's always the same in every club. But this has the advantage that the main perverts are actually invisible to the camera, and it always follows the same pattern, mainly how to impress the freshers once you're a second year. And it's a kind of Munchausen by proxy thing, really. The second years kind of get the freshers into some dreadful situation and then proceed to rescue them from it by some fantastic heroics, and that seems to be the pattern in most university climbing clubs. It was a really great time. There's a lot of great characters, and really that sort of set the foundation for my future climbing, certainly, while still being able to study. Mark Linden, who's here tonight, was part of that crew, and really it was through Mark that I got introduced to the London scene, and after Bangor I exchanged my PhD for a job mixing plaster on a building site, which was absolutely stunning career move, but that was the reason for going down to London, and I'd already met Mick Fowler through Mark and stuff, and then we'd regularly come to North Wales, Scott. Really, from London you could travel anywhere, maybe far away, but at least you've got the choice of places to go to. And this was a weekend coming up to do Black Cleft on Clogwyn Dir Arddi, which was basically fairly straightforward until the ice ran out, and then you've got sort of E1 rock climbing in crampons working up left through back onto the boulder and through the overlap. So it's quite a tricky route, really. And this is Clogwyn Dir Gully, left hand, a little gem when it comes into condition. And on the right is an early ascent of Gemini on Ben Nevis, all on weekends up from London. I remember on the way back on this one, when I was reading The White Spider in the car, which was the great heroics on the north face of the Eiger, and they just escaped the exit cracks, and I kind of closed the book and looked across at the driver, and he was actually snoring over the wheel as we came into the Ballachulish roundabout, which we then hit and sort of went airborne over the fence into the field. And there were car crashes all the time because people were so tired driving up from London to climb all weekend in Scotland, and you'd get back for work at about 6 in the morning, which was fine for the civil servants. Like Mick was a tax collector, so he just laid face down on the carpet of the office with a paperclip behind the door and catch a few hours sleep. And so if anybody came in, he'd just pretend he was trying to pick up this paperclip. Meanwhile, I'd be on the building site with a load of hungry plasterers demanding yet another bucket full of plaster. I didn't have the luxury of the civil service at the time. But the main thing was, if you couldn't get up to Scotland, you could always go ice climbing in Dover. And there was a great period of exploration. Again, kind of Mick was the Pied Piper that led everybody down there. And this was a route called the Cast of Thousands, which had been tried lots of times, but we eventually made the first ascent of. And it's really kind of nice cheddar, cheese, Gouda consistency down the bottom. You can get your axes in. But then as you get towards the top, it dries out into this horrendous, crumbly kind of cornice at the top. And took lots of long falls from that onto warthog driven into the chalk before eventually, I mean, I tried it so many times, eventually I had a funnel kind of like dug through the cornice at the top. And then, because of, you know, the natural progression is to get out into the Alps. And this is on the Drew Couloir here, not much sign of a couloir. There's a very hard rock section in the middle. A multi-day route in those days with bivvy gear on our backs. Probably done in a day these days with a bit more of a lightweight approach. And this on the right-hand one on the Cassing route on the Trecima de Lavaredo with Dave Turnbull, who's here tonight as well. And that was a great route. We had one go at it and kind of was slow getting going, lost the route a little bit, weather was a bit iffy. And, you know, by midday we were only a few pitches up, and so we canned it, and then the next day we really hit it, much lighter weight, flat out, and we got up and down it in a day. And then the natural progression is off to expeditioning in the greater ranges. And this was the first time really was off to Africa to try a new route up Kilimanjaro. And we were going around to the breach wall to try a new line left of the existing route there. But on the way, we spotted this ice fall. So myself and Mick had a go at that. And we managed, after the first few technical pitches, we had a long way to go. So we dispensed with the rope and soloed the rest of it, as you can see in the right-hand one there. And then Mick had to go, always just has his 3-week civil service holiday, and that's that. And I kind of thought, you know, I'll never, ever be freer than now. I just realised I had no ties. So I didn't go home after 3 weeks, and I stayed in Africa for 6 months. And during that time, had soloed the Diamond Couloir on Mount Kenya, main summit, Batian up here, back down across to Nelian here. And this is the kind of bivouac shelter on top of Nelian. And I had a really terrifying dream in there. You know, I kind of woke up from a nightmare. I was completely wide awake and just thinking, oh, it's only a nightmare. It's fine, it's fine. And then, clear as a bell next to me, this woman's voice starts speaking to me, you know. And she just says, now, come on, be serious. I was absolutely terrified, you know. And I just put it down to dehydration, bit of altitude, etc. But the odd thing was, a little while later, I had another dream, and I was at home in my bed, and I woke up, and I was so regretful because I'd come home early. I was just like, I was thinking, you coward, you would never have been freer, and you copped out just because you're feeling a bit homesick, and you've come home, and you'll never have that chance again. And then I woke up, and I was still in Africa. It was just this kind of double dream, you know. And from that point on, there was no stopping me. I just like ran up the overdraft, threw caution to the wind, and just kept travelling as much as possible. It was fantastic. And got down to the Okavango swamps, spent 10 days in a dugout canoe, travelling up through the rivers run down from the Angolan highlands and basically just filters away into the North Kalahari in a huge inland delta. Absolutely stunning place. Hundreds of square miles of these swamps at the top end of the Kalahari. And then we decided to go to South America. This is with Sam Host, who I'd been leader of the club in Bangor, and Sam was the following leader, and we'd both graduated by this stage. So I was the famous Norman Tebbit saying about, my father didn't riot, he got on his bike and went looking for work. So we did the same thing expedition-wise, because it was the early days of Thatcherism, and we'd had a great time in Bangor because you were never, ever offered a job in the job centre, and you could sign on all summer, so we did lots and lots of climbing. Except Sam did agriculture, and they actually offered him a job on a farm. And most of us had avoided work as conscientious objectors type approach. But Sam really, because he was doing agriculture, had no excuse, and it completely messed up the summer climbing programme. We tried to persuade him to feign, illness or whatever, but he was dispatched to some sort of gulag setup in Llanfairfechan, I think it was. And but we did eventually get away to Peru to try the west face of Sierra Chico, which was unclimbed then. And we gave it, not a very good shot, actually, because we were coming under Sierra Grande, which was a recent scene of Joe Simpson's epic, immortalised in Touching the Void, when Simon Yates was forced to cut the rope. And Joe Simpson was left for dead and then crawled out of the bottom of a crevasse and down the glacier for 3 days. And just as we were passing under there, we got avalanched, probably into the very crevasse that Joe slept in, which kind of put us off a bit. But we gave it a shot, but eventually retreated. And I took my hat off to Joe Simpson, because we had a heck of a struggle to get down that glacier. We had to abseil in a few places. The route finding was really difficult with two of us, pretty fresh. And he crawled down there with a smashed leg, no food or water for 3 days, to hope in the terror that everybody would have left base camp by the time he got there. And he crawled in the middle of the night, just before they were leaving the first thing that morning. Otherwise he would have died on the mountain. And then travelled further down to Chile, to the Torres del Paine, soloed a new route on the Peñeta there, not to the summit, but we did manage to summit the North Tower of Paine whilst we were down there. But then I got offered a job on the Lima Times, covering all kinds of stories, but including the environmental ones there, which the main thing being the huge 12 million tonne per annum anchovy fishery and the effects that El Nino has on it. So spent a lot of time at sea there with their institute, writing various stories on their research and management of the anchovy fishery. And got down to Punta Arenas and found out that this vessel was in there, the Forest, which was the coastal supply vessel for the Falkland Islands, and it had been the first vessel since the war. This is 1986 now. First vessel since the war to be allowed through Argentinian waters to get to Chile for a refit in Punta Arenas. And I thought, it'd be really nice to see the Falkland Islands, because this guy, John Barton, was a Falkland Islander, and he'd done marine biology, oceanography. We'd gone through the course together, and he being one of only 2 people who got a first that year. I thought, I'll just nip over to the Falklands to see John. But the only way he could get there was to work a passage on this thing. So I kind of basically stalked the captain through all the social functions in Punta Arenas, which were mainly church-related, and he thought I was some kind of religious nut, because I'd always turn up at these tea parties and engage him in conversation, till eventually I managed to persuade him that he would let me sign on as a deckhand, and I had to sign papers with 5p a day pay and 5p a day deducted for rations. And we sailed to the Falklands, and that was quite an experience. As oh my God, I cannot believe this. I'll just switch it off. The last time this happened was when we were having a lecture in the... Last time that happened was when I was having a lecture in the school about responsible use of mobile phones for children. It was... nobody ever rings me normally. I mean, Johnny no, mate. Yeah, so we actually, much to my surprise, we got to the Falkland Islands. We almost sank on the way. We limped into Fox Bay West because the refit hadn't been very good, and we just had one cylinder left running on the marine engine when we got there. And so John was quite surprised to see me when I pitched up on his door. And here he is filling up his peat trailer with the natural resources. He eventually became the government director of natural resources, covering fisheries and gold prospecting and oil and everything. And here's a typical peat cutting on the Falklands. I messed around with this photo a bit, beefed up the colours just for fun, but this hasn't been touched. This is a Falkland sunset. It's like the atmosphere there is just different. It feels like it's pressed down on you, you know. It's an absolutely stunning place. You've got these coral white sand beaches, just perfect skies, really strange cloud formations. It's one heck of a place. And but you have to be careful because a lot of the coast is still mined, and we went off on various explorations, climbing, etc. And you'd have to have a minefield map with you, and they'd get washed out of the minefields along beaches and stuff. So you had to be pretty careful as you were going. But basically, once I got there, they had just established the new fishing zone around the EZ, around the island, and they were crying out for marine scientists to work as observers on the commercial fisheries there. 'Cause prior to that, there was 600 deep-sea vessels fishing around. It was a complete and utter free-for-all. So they established this 200-mile zone, and we're now trying to exert authority over it and get a licensing regime up and running to get revenue from the fishery and reduce the pressure on the resources down to below 200 ships. So typically, you'd be dispatched on the patrol ship, and then you get in a rib, you'd get alongside a trawler. I think this is the Rybak Morski from the big Polish fleet that was there at the time. And you'd live on board. A fishing vessel could be Polish, Spanish, Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese, for however long it was needed to sample the commercial catch and check that all their gear and stuff was within regulations. And then the patrol ship would come back, take you off, transfer you to another vessel. And it was a great apprenticeship, really, to find out how a commercial fishing operation works. And we also did a fair bit of research fishing there as well. Here we have the Wieczno from Poland was contracted, an old sidewinder, but a really good research team on board and a crew that was really up to speed and good at research fishing. And here we've got a mixed bag of fish coming on board the Falkland Desire, I think this was, up the stern ramp. That'd be the guys coming to pick me up off whichever vessel I was on. And eventually I was sent back to Britain to recruit a team of observers, many of which I got from the department here at Bangor, from the MSc fisheries course or the undergraduate course. So it's great to be able to take a bunch of people down there from Bangor, train them up, and then manage them for the rest of my time down there. There's only so many thousands of fish you can slaughter before you become permanently deranged. So I was taken off the fishing vessels and sent on my next mission by the governor, which was to this place, 600 miles to the east, southeast, South Georgia, about 80 miles from tip to toe. Really interesting place with a lot of unclimbed summits, and basically had been run by the military since the war in 82. So I was sent down there in 89, I think it was, to try and re-civilianize the management of the harbour operation. Subsequently, I've sailed down there in climbing expeditions, and this is the type of sailing you have here on Skip Novak's Pelagic, going through heavy seas. We did have the luxury of going down on a ship that time. But there's obstacles in the way, and some of these tabular bergs that drift up are actually bigger than South Georgia itself, and you have to divert around them. 100-mile iceberg has occurred more than once on the passage there. And the basic idea was to invent a harbour customs and fisheries regime, manage it, and get a data system going for it. So I was sent down by MRAG to do that, and lived with the garrison, officially known as the harbour master, but generally called that civvy bastard, suitably clad in yellow here with the 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards, who were a great bunch to be with, and very strange for them having a civilian in their midst. And the Gulf War broke out whilst we were there. And this was my kingdom, the government seat of government at King Edward Point there, and Grytviken, the old whaling station here. This has been totally taken down now because of a panic over asbestos and pollution, etc. In my view, a slight overreaction, because it was the most intact station where you could really see what the whaling industry had been about, but funds were limited by the government, and they were scared that the asbestos would mean having to remove the newly funded, newly re-established Bass Research Station on King Edward Point. So this would be us marking the drop zone for the Hercules, which would drop in our resupplies over when there weren't any ships coming down, which were infrequent visitors from the Falklands, apart from the fishing fleet. And then that would be our mail and supplies coming in. And these things would drift miles inland, they'd weigh several hundredweight, and you have to drag them all the way back to the shore, get them into the rigid raiders and back to the base. And it was the tail end of the Soviet Union, really. We were trying to license these vessels at the same time the Soviet Union was breaking up, and they were beginning to form private companies, etc. So it was quite tricky to get everything in order. They were transshipping in all fjords all around the island. So it was really important to find out where they were operating, and then gradually try and persuade them to come only into Cumberland Bay East, so that we could administer everything there. So if the Navy ever called by with a spare helicopter, I'd commandeer it and we'd do a quick patrol to check. But often we were patrolling on foot with binoculars and a radio, and you'd come across an operation like this, this over near Jason Harbour, and the longliners would come in, transfer their catch, then they'd take on fuel, water, new fishing kit, and they'd be ready to go for another couple of months. And the reefer, the transport vessel, once it's full up, and had resupplied the fishing fleet, would then head back 45 days straight to Murmansk from there. But being a fearless bureaucrat, if you've seen the sheer tonnage that a harbour master can generate of paperwork, then you too would eventually throw in the towel and abide by the regulations. But not only did I ruin the Soviet fishery, that shortly afterwards the Soviet Union collapsed as well. So I like to, as Spike, with apologies to Spike Milligan, think that it was my part in their downfall. I've been back many times on both on fisheries patrol, but also on the ground fish survey and various other programs around the island. And this is the Makshivo, which we caught fishing illegally there, longliner. I think by this stage it was licensed to the Trans-Corsican Republic, which I think the Republic itself lasted about a month. And we took them back for due process in the Falklands, a full trial where they mounted a defence, etc. But they were found guilty, and the they lost their ship or their catch, of course, and the ship was eventually taken out and sank after it had been cleaned. And this is the Audos research rig from Aberdeen University. The idea here was to get an estimate of toothfish populations by you lower down this, well, it's autonomous actually, you release it, sinks to the seafloor, and it's got a baited camera and current meters on board, and you can work out the volume of the bait plume, and therefore your density of fish when you know how fast they swim, etc. Gives you a pretty good population estimate. And then I was carried out a 10-day fishing depletion experiment where you fish continuously on the same spot, and as your catch rates go down, you can do a clever back calculation on that as an estimate of the original population, and cross-reference these various methods with bottom ground trawling, etc., to get different catch estimates. And this is my bird scarer, and as somebody less charitable pointed out to me, that if any self-respecting bird saw that, they would indeed run a mile. But it did actually scare the albatrosses as well, because the problem is with the longliners that the albatrosses were getting caught because they dive for the bait as the snood lines, the side lines with the bait on, sink. The albatrosses will just dive in to take it, and they get dragged down. And the standard setup for a streamer line involves having to have, it's very prescriptive, you have to have a weight, but these guys fish with like a ladder arrangement of their lines. They've got a hauling line and a fishing line, and the weight just tangled in the lines all the time. So we put these floats on instead, which stopped the entanglement, but the drag on the floats meant it operated as good as a weight in any case. And you can see here that it's keeping the albatrosses away from the fishing line, which are ballasted anyway and sink pretty quickly. So as long as you've got 100 meters like that, it's out of their reach. And we really did get a marked reduction in albatross mortality. And we also did trials of doing it at night with and without a streamer line, at day with and without a streamer line. And sure enough, as you'd expect, there was a geometric reduction in down to zero of catch of albatross. We had to up the sample size to get statistical significance later on, but even those first trials proved the point. And having, now got rid of the entire fishing fleet, there was nothing left to do really but go climbing. And so I teamed up with the Royal Marine Mountain leader there, Jan Mills, and I'd already tried Mount Paget, the highest summit on the island. It's 9,600 feet, but you're starting on the beach. You're talking about a 9-10 day round trip to the summit and back. And had already attempted it with a visiting German expedition, and we got beaten back by a ferocious storm, but went back a few months later with Jan, and we managed to get up Paget and spotted this. I'm going to zip through these last slides now as quickly as possible. Spotted this on one of my coastal patrols, which was the Three Brothers, and was unclimbed at the time. And in between contracts, I was back at MRAG in London, working for them on various things. But they were very good. John Beddington there was quite an enlightened guy, and he used to let me have periods of time off on expeditions. So I did eventually get to go to Everest during that time with Henry Todd, an old friend from London, who said, you can help out a little bit and you can just pay for your food at the flight and we'll see how it goes. So here we are heading up the East Rongbuk Glacier with an unacclimatized yak with a very light load at the start of the expedition. And they too get altitude sickness and acclimatized during the expedition, can carry 3 times as much by the end of a trip on the way out as they can at the start. And we managed to get up Everest. It was great doing it with Henry because he allowed us to do it in the style we wanted, which was a pair of us operating within his expedition. So we didn't have a guide and we had no Sherpas with us when we were climbing. Sherpas did help us establish the camps with some load carrying, but we took equal part in cutting platforms, putting up tents, stocking those camps. We spent 6 weeks doing that before we made our summit attempt. And as luck would have it, the weather turned bad when we were in the top camp for 3 days, and the mountain was completely clear. And so we stayed for 3 nights at 8,300 meters, waiting for the wind to drop till on the 4th day we had an improving forecast, and we went to the summit and had the mountain to ourselves all day. And then a 4th night at 8:03 on the way back. So it was a fairly long time at altitude. And once we realized we were going to have to stay there for a few days, we switched to oxygen. We had hoped initially to try if we'd gone straight the next day without, but we had to switch to oxygen by that stage. And of course, lo and behold, things happen. There's us on a family holiday, and the few economies setting in with the children here. But as my wife Shan and Eleanor know in, and as I'm sure many of you will appreciate, life moves on at a pace. So I had to take chances when they came, and luckily as a result of Everest, S4C were interested in making a film on South Georgia, and with Alan Hughes here from Tanreval, Vachwen, we set off to have a go at the Three Brothers, which I'd spotted 10 years earlier. And it was really great. I did a whole series of programs with Al, and it's thanks to him, really, that I got a fair bit of publicity in Wales. And people have been very generous ever since. I feel a bit of a fraud, really, but that's the way it is. And we had lots of fun in the meantime. And this is the weather again turned bad. It's a notoriously bad place, South Georgia, for the weather. But we had a small break focused for the afternoon on our last possible day. And the rest of the team sort of said, we think we'll sod this for a game of soldiers. But I thought, if we've got a ridge coming in, I'll go and have a little look. And sure enough, the weather came good. And I managed to summit. This is looking back from the summit over the Second Brother out to Fortuna Bay. And this is the country that Shackleton came through on the left here when he did his famous escape from Antarctica. And he landed in King Haakon Bay on the uninhabited side and spent crossed the whole island in 36 hours through these glaciers to get to the whaling stations to raise the alert. I've done the Shackleton Traverse, and it normally is done in 3 days now, and those guys, after 2 years out in the wilderness with no maps, no kit, did it in 36 hours. Absolutely incredible that they had the fortitude to do that. Whenever my rock boots are hurting me and I'm kind of feeling a bit miserable, I always say, think what Shackleton or Priestley or one of those great Antarctic pioneers would have done. Priestley came back to a ridge and saw the ship sailing away for the winter, you know, and they just had the clothes they were standing up in. So they just shot a few seals. They made a stove out of bits of metal that would burn blubber and lived in the bottom of a crevasse all winter until the ship came back the next year. And this was down on the Antarctic mainland, and they all survived. They were as hard as nails, that lot. This is a typical traverse in South Georgia. We spent 17 days going from the southern tip of the island to the halfway to try and climb Mount Baum and Starbuck, and we didn't even see a mountain the whole 17 days. We just clagged in, and this is us when we got down to Royal Bay. And en route, we had all our tents destroyed in a storm, so we had to dig a big snow hole, get in there for 4 days until the storm passed through. But then we went back a second time a few years later, 2016, I think. And these are the mountains we didn't even see when we passed through this way the first time. And we climbed this mountain, Starbuck, the first ascent. And there's Steve Venables on the summit. And then we went on another couple of days skiing through these glaciers around up here and round. And this is Mount Baum, and we did the first ascent of that as well. So it was great to get a couple of those in. There's Mount Paget in the background, and Nordenskjöld, the second highest peak, just behind Steve's leg there. And it was a long, cold night getting down. And this is Nordenskjöld, which you always assumed it had been climbed. And then Criquet, the French climber, Nelson de Malvive, I think his name is, kindly said, no, it's just, I didn't get to the summit. I stopped before by a big ice mushroom, which we think was this one here, this very noticeable hump on the ridge. And I got hold of this information. So I had one go at it, failed, and went back in, I think this was 2011, and we managed to climb it with Richard Spillett, one of my old mates from London. And there's Richard there as we were getting back down with the mountain in the background. And whilst we were laying on the beach, these two youngsters just decided to march straight up till we had to drag our sacks aside, and they just carried on through up into the tussock grass, and we left it to them. And I'd really recommend South Georgia if you ever get the chance to go there. Great place, still some high unclimbed summits left to go at as well. It's like the Alps dropped into the sea. So thanks very much. Miraculously, I've managed to churn through that lot on time, I think. Hope you are going to enjoy the Science Week next week, and as many people as possible can attend. I'm sure it's going to be a really great event for the university. So thanks very much for coming tonight.
Well, Diolch, Caradoc. That was absolutely fascinating. It really was. And we've got some time for questions. So does anybody have any questions?
Os yw unrhyw cwestiynau yn Cymraeg, fi'n hollol barod I ateb yn Cymraeg hefyd.
Yeah, we've got a question here. There's a microphone. Slip a microphone along.
Were you threatened at all when you went on the patrol ships? I mean...
No, it's amazing, really. You know, most fishing vessels, they're keen to keep on the right side of authority because they've got a business to run, etc. You know, so occasionally I'd team up with the Royal Marines in places, and they would like get on board, you know, gung-ho and kind of secure the vessel and say, okay, Craig, it's safe for you to come aboard. And I sort of say, well, I've been doing this for 6 months with my clipboard and pencil, you know. It was like, I've had very little trouble ever, really.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering, like, what was your internal experiences when, like, something went wrong on a hike? Like, you spoke about your tents being blown away and different challenges that happened. Like, how do you feel in that moment? And also, how do you prepare beforehand for, like, such challenges?
Well, it only happens to you once, and then you don't never get caught out again, and that happened to me. These days I always have, you know, you can have all these wonderful ultra lightweight snow shovels, which are like chocolate fire guards. You know, I get a garden spade and shorten the handle and file it down razor sharp so you can dig through solid ice virtually, and with those you can always dig a snow hole. But I remember being a proud possessor of this Gore-Tex bivouac tent, which I'd put up, and I'd put in extra long bamboo poles and everything, and there was a hurricane blowing around. I'd managed to get it up, and I turned around to pick up my rucksack, and the wind blew me over, and I thought, what's that beach ball blowing off into the thing? And I looked around, and there was just 4 bamboo sticks, and my tent had gone, you know, and I was on my own in South Georgia, and with one of these plastic snow shovels. Had an epic night, you know. Just had to just about manage to survive it. But these days you've got better weather forecasts, so you tend not to go out into the teeth of a storm so much, but they can still catch you out sometimes.
Any other questions? Nope, I can't. Oh, yes.
How many years are you going to carry on for to go into the future?
Well, you know what it's like, Dave, yourself. If I trained as much as I do now when I was a youngster, I would have been, you know, phenomenal instead of like wasting my youth, you know, with the likes of you. But yeah, you begin to. I think it was who was it? It was said. I might have been Anne Aaron. Oh, it was Lucy Creamer, you know. She sort of said you should treat your body like a temple, not a garbage bin, you know. And I think when we're young, we all tend to treat them like garbage bins, but get a lot more careful the older we get.
I can't see any more hands raised. Perhaps I could just ask one question. You've described losing your tent. You described throwing your rope away. What's the most dangerous moment you've ever had? If you had to pick one out, is that where you felt that was really the trickiest moment?
The night after I lost my tent, I'd piggybacked on the back of a German expedition who I'd managed to persuade that if they didn't let me join them, I'd arrest them on the spot in South Georgia. So eventually they realized I was a climber, so I joined them. And so they were coming up the next day. They were doing double carries, and we all got together that night in their tent, and they thought it was hilarious that I'd lost my tent. And the weather just kept getting worse and worse, till in the end, we were outside, 4 of us, digging furiously with the 2 shovels, and we just had a shaft that we were excavating as this wall of snow came in over us with the tent on the bottom. And the last thing we did was lower somebody down by their ankles to cut off the fly sheet, just tear it off so we had some form of shelter, and pull the radio out to call the yacht. And then we had to descend through the night, but we literally couldn't stand up. We were ice axe breaking on horizontal ground. You know, the wind was horrendous. I had a lot of respect for these guys. Gerhard Schmatz and Hans Engel was the 3rd man to climb Everest without oxygen. And they were a strong team, you know. And suddenly, I can remember going along with them, 'cause eventually they started, you know, sharing their food with me before this. And I couldn't speak German, they couldn't speak any English. But they ate this black rye bread, you know, and they were, had this incredible wind. And after I started sharing food with them, after about 3 days, you know, I suddenly let out this enormous fart. And I said, good God, it's incredible, I speak German. And Gerard understood this, and there was like a stony silence. And I was thinking, oh, God, I've said the wrong thing here, you know, having blagged my way onto the expedition. And then he kind of was a quick translation, you know, between them. And then they all started laughing and slapping their lederhosen, you know. Yeah. We have heard about this, the good British sense of toilet humour. So we kind of, you know, I was getting a bit of the vocabulary and got to be good friends with them when we were going down in this hurricane. And suddenly Gerhard just collapsed. And then he kind of rolled over and he was having a fit. And I was thinking, oh, this is it. You know, Gerhard's gone down. Tough old guy, you know. This is really bad. So I kind of crawled through this on my all fours, got to him, and he was like jumping around. And he's like this. And I cleaned the snow out of his mouth, you know, screamed in his ear, Gerhard, you know, what's wrong? And I just heard this like, Scheiße, mein Hosen. And what had happened was his harness had come down, and as the wind had rolled him over, the rope had trussed him up like a Christmas turkey. There was nothing wrong with him at all. He was just like... So we all had to unroll him and get him stood back on his feet. And that brief sort of moment of humour in the middle of the night really was we thought we might actually make it out alive. Yeah, so that was the worst night, really.
Well, just before we finish, Caradoc, I'd like to give you this gift from the School of Ocean Sciences to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.